So, hello and welcome. This is the first podcast of 2022. I must admit, with COVID, I'm not entirely sure what happened since 2019, but just the world kind of seems to go in a blur. And what I try and do most weeks is introduce you to people that hopefully will add value to your business or career, or basically share some really good insights or topics and that kind of thing. And hopefully, over the course of the year, I'm going to get on some really interesting guests from all around the world to talk about some different stuff. So Joanne, who I'm going to introduce you to today, I actually met at it was a conference called People Power, which was at the start of December, so about a month or so ago. And basically, I sat through her talk, and it was fascinating to do with inclusivity and diversity and lots of different things. So I thought she would be a perfect guest for the podcast. So what we're going to do over the next kind of 30, 40 minutes is have a great conversation about her background, how she got started, then really kind of go into some kind of key topics and stuff. And if you would like to join us, please do. And then likewise, if you also write any comments or questions in the chat, they'll also pop on my screen as well. And then for anyone that doesn't see this live, because I'm very aware that this is a bank holiday in the UK, this all gets clipped up and goes onto YouTube as well. So Joanne, I'm just going to bring you in. There we go. Perfect. So everyone now can see you and hear you. There we go. Would you
Good afternoon, Steve. Great to be here.
No, brilliant. I must apologies that it's a bank holiday, but also it's no better way to start the day. But the funny thing is that, I've had 2 weeks off now, which is the first time I've had 2 weeks off in a year. And actually, just to get back in the swing of things, so I'm actually glad to kind of break the ice before everyone starts back tomorrow. Would you be happy to give like a quick kind of 30, 60 second intro about yourself, just to help kind of set the scene? And then, obviously we'll go through all the usual stuff we normally talk about people's backstory and the detail. But I think it always really helps just to kind of tell people a bit about who you are, if that's cool.
Yeah, well, absolutely fine with that. So my name is Joanne Lockwood. I use the pronouns she and her. I describe myself as a trans woman. I transitioned about coming over 6 years ago now. I spent most of my career running IT companies in the IT world. I sold my business in 2017 and gender transitioned at the same time. So as if I wasn't making it hard enough for myself,
Big, yeah.
I went for a complete reinvention. So out of IT, out of my old life, and predominantly, I look back on it now, and one of my desires at that time was to try and retain as much of my life as I could. And I look back on it and I haven't retained much in terms of my network, my career, finances, where I live, etc., etc. But I still have my family, which to me was the most important thing, and maybe my closest friends. But I look back and my life is completely different than it was 5 or 6 years ago. Completely different.
So I must admit, so at the People Power event, basically, I actually walked into your talk by chance, but it was one of those really kind of great coincidences. And I must admit, it was one of those things that everything you talked about, and I'm going to ask you to talk about it more than me, because obviously you'll do a much better job. But it was the kind of thing that, as someone that does work with a lot of different businesses, SMEs and onwards, everything you said resonated. And it's almost one of the things I was talking about on the podcast is likewise, it's fine. White middle-aged straight man talk about certain things, but actually and it's something you spoke brilliantly in the talk, was that only gives me one viewpoint. And as much as I can empathize and try and understand what my black friends and their families and etc. have been through, there's only so much you can do. So I love to partly do the podcast, and actually we touch on it later about sharing good advice and stuff, but the more we can both raise awareness on different stuff, almost talk about why and how it can have genuine positive business kind of impact, but then also just change views and just share information and stuff, and just share introductions to interesting people, I thought was really kind of fascinating. So it's one of my kind of later questions, but I'm happy to kind of jump into it now. So diversity and inclusion, to you, what does that mean? I'm just very interested, to kind of set the scene for the whole kind of talk. In terms of, I guess to you, what does that mean to you?
Well, it's a phrase. Diversity and inclusion is an often used, misused, misunderstood phrase. It's not really, people don't see it as words anymore. They don't see diversity and inclusion. They see it as diversity and inclusion, D&I or DENI, diversity, equity, inclusion. Mm-hmm. And sometimes we throw a B in there for belonging, DEIB or Debbie, however you want to say it. And people often don't stop to think about it. I probably summarize it as creating positive people experiences.
Mhm.
And I appreciate PPE is a bit topical at the moment, but fundamentally, it's about creating environments, experiences for people where they can thrive and they can feel full positive.
Mhm.
And that's, I think, the output, because we talk about inputs, we talk about all the challenges of DNI, but the outcome really is creating environments where people can thrive. That's the ultimate output. That's the why we're doing this. Why does it matter? Because we want people to have the opportunity to succeed. So the diversity is recognizing that we're all different. We'll have our own life skills. We all have our lived experience, whether that's faith, race, ethnicity, LGBTQ plus, maleness, femaleness, non-binariness, whatever that may be. So we all have our different backgrounds, but fundamentally we are all different. So it's recognizing that our differences are our superpower, and it's the inclusion element is recognizing that our differences mean that we need to be included in a different way. We can't treat everyone the same. We're not motivated the same. We don't want to be communicated the same way. We're not empowered. We're not challenged in the same way. So the diversity is we're all different. Inclusion is recognizing that we all need to be empowered in a different way to allow us to succeed in the way that we want to succeed. So that's about creating this culture, creating this empowerment, creating environments where people can thrive whilst being very person-centric.
What's really interesting, and it's just because I love doing this, I just love talking to people, but it's likewise one of my former guests, because a lot of my background as an engineer is in renewables, and for a long time renewables was about the climate change argument more than the business case. When I think it was about 5-10 years ago, there was a real shift when people actually realized that actually putting time and effort into diversification into renewables made perfect business sense, because it made them more productive, diversified the risk, it did everything they wanted to do. And one of the things that really kind of struck me with your talk was actually the more you spoke, the more I kind of twigged, because I'm human as well. I'm, nobody's perfect, but it was almost really kind of acknowledging and investing in making people feel included in the workplace and that kind of thing will have genuine impact on the bottom line. And it's that balance, I think, that, do you ever find that some people worry? I guess it depends on the background, but almost, in the same way that people used to poo-poo climate change protesters, I guess there's balance, but climate change to do with an agenda. But actually, yes, it kind of is in some ways, but also it makes perfect business sense to do it as well. I don't know, almost some of the, do you ever find any barriers to what people think to really kind of invest in this area?
There's a lot of people pushing back on wokeness, politically correctness. You've seen it probably in the press recently about we're sanitizing humor, we're destroying comedy, we're creating environments where people can't be themselves, despite the fact the objective is so people can be themselves. I think often what we're forgetting is, let's take comedy or humor. If it's constraining your comedy or humor, maybe your comedy or humor was at somebody's expense. And we think about the British sense of humor, the sarcasm, the dry humor we have as in the UK. Often if you look at the sitcoms, we look at the comedy clubs, they're all about putting someone down and making laugh out of somebody's misfortune or their characteristic or highlighting their difference. So we can be funny without someone being the target of that humor. And I know comedians, some more intelligent ones, maybe use themselves as their own parody, which is fine. And the danger of that is they're almost giving permission to use their disability as a humor, use their race as a humor, whatever. So again, it's a very privileged thing to say, I'm okay with it, therefore it's okay. The danger is by using self-deprecation is you're almost saying, well, I've given you permission to laugh at me, therefore I'm giving you permission to laugh at other people. So I think we can use more intelligent humor. We can develop our humor in ways where it's not at someone's expense. It's creating more intelligent conversations. And I think when we're looking at comedians maybe who rely on that deprecation, that self-deprecation, or using others as the butt of the joke, that can be quite lazy. And I think that's what we've got to try and avoid, because nobody wants to be offended or have an offence at them. But if you're sat in the audience and you're the butt of the joke, how does that make you feel? You could laugh it off. But we think about phrases like microaggressions. You may hear these jokes all the time. and they eventually have a toll on you. Your Scottish accent, your Irish accent, your
No, I
low
get you. I
IQ,
get you.
your disability. Yeah, it's like looking at James Bond villains. Every James Bond villain has a facial disfigurement, a limp. In the last one, No Time to Die, one of the villains had a false eye that came out. So we always see the villain as being painted as less than complete, less than normal, whatever normal may mean. So we're creating this parody of good versus bad, where bad is always someone who has something wrong with them or something different about them. It's an accent, it's a facial disfigurement, it's a limp, it's something. And how does that make you feel if you have a facial disfigurement, if you have an Eastern European accent, if you're always finding that you are the brunt of you're always the nemesis? That reflects into society. It reflects on how people treat you in society, how people treat you in the workplace. So yeah, people do push back because people feel that they're losing something. They're losing the ability to be them. It's a very privileged statement because you've never had to think about the impact of your words or someone else's words on you. If you don't suffer from that, from being impacted, then you probably don't understand what it's like for somebody else to have words used against them. So I think that's the challenge we have, is not to try and sanitize conversations. It's not trying to police people's language. It's not telling people how to think or what to think. What I would like to do is, when we talk about being woke, is awaken people to think about the impact of their words, thoughts, and deeds. And I'm sure most people don't want to create a negative impact. Most people, if they realise that someone's impacted by their actions, they'll be quite taken back and think, "Oh, hang on a minute, that's not. That wasn't my intent." So we often have great intent, but it's understanding your great intent may also be problematic. It may also have negative connotations, and that's what I'd like to push back on people. Not tell you what to do. I don't want to tell you what to think. Just be aware of your impact on others.
No, I agree. So one of the things I like to do with the podcast is actually go through people's story, because again, this all gets clipped up and goes onto YouTube. But then likewise, you're a pretty successful entrepreneur, and obviously you've been through and you've worked in a lot of different places. And then likewise, I also hope that people from all different backgrounds, who might eventually kind of watch this, some might resonate with stuff that you say or whichever. And if we can, almost going back to sharing a bit about your story, where you grew up, what you were like at school, that kind of thing. Just because the hope is that people might resonate with it, might be going through the same kind of thing. They might be where you were 10 years ago, say. And it's that balance of, actually, for me, the more you see people around that might be on a similar path or from a similar background or whichever, I think it helps give people confidence and stuff. So if you're happy to, like, where did you grow up?
I was actually born in Singapore.
Wow.
In a British medical hospital. Father was in the Navy, and he and my mum went out to Singapore probably about 6 months, 8 months before I was born, which I think was about the minimum time frame my mum could have flown. So yeah, I was born in the mid-60s in Singapore. We lived in Johor Bahru, which is in Malaysia, just over the causeway from Singapore. My father's tour of duty in the Navy at that time came to an end, and we came back to the UK I think it was just in time for the World Cup in 1966. So we got back in time for the World Cup. Obviously a very successful year if you're English. And I grew up in a very typical lower middle class, I guess you would call it, family. My father was a gunnery artificer in the Navy. My mother was a full-time parent at the time. Latterly, they both became teachers. My mother became a primary school teacher. My father became a secondary school woodwork and technical drawing, metalwork type teachers, or whatever you would call that these days. So yeah, I grew up in a very lower middle class working environment. We didn't have a lot of money. I went to a typical state school from the age of 5 or 6 through to my to the end of my exam. So again, very typical sort of very white, very middle classish type environment just outside of Portsmouth.
Okay. And then obviously, because it's a theme that you could talk about quite a lot, your trans journey, at what point did you start to feel yourself? Does that make sense?
Yeah, so I grew up in so born in the mid-60s. I there was no language in those
Hmm.
days. You know,
Hmm.
homosexuality was partially discriminated in 1967. There was no internet. There was two channels on telly, and you had to tweak the dial to change the channel. My parents weren't very progressive. They weren't they weren't hippies or rock and rollers or punks or anything. They were kind of just your average family at the time. So there was no gay, lesbian, radical
Hmm.
type thoughts. Music, if it wasn't classical, was frowned upon in our family. So, yeah, we're very straight laced, very putting bass and haircut. So there was no language around being trans.
Hmm.
I didn't know what it was, but I did appreciate that there was something in my head that didn't align. I always felt like I was in the wrong queue, standing with the wrong people,
From what age did
not
you
doing the
kind
things I
of,
wanted to.
was that from teenager or
It's
before? Or?
it's hard to put your finger on it. I'm very conscious that I don't want to imprint false memories and create false
Yeah.
associations, and there's a danger of that. But I would say that around the age of five, six or seven, 7 or 8, in that sort of primary school, as it was in the early 70s,
Hmm.
I remember trying skirts up in the dressing up box. I remember wanting to play one of the ugly sisters in a pantomime. Um, I definitely had those thoughts. I definitely had those feelings. I was a cub and then a scout, and I always felt like I wanted to be a brownie and a guide. So yeah, it was really difficult. You know, you're 7 or 8, 10 years old, whatever,
Hmm.
however old I was. You've got these kind of random thoughts in your head. There's no outlet. There's no description. There's nobody having these conversations.
Hmm.
It's not a conversation you can bring up with your parents or anything. It was just, it is what it is. You just get on and be who you are. You know, you live up to the programming you're given, and these thoughts didn't go away. They kind of grew throughout my pre-teens, teens, and post-teen years. Manifest themselves in various ways. Uh, as I often say to people, you know, if you're a little girl and you're caught trying your mum's shoes on, your mum's makeup, and your mum's jewelry, it's really cute. Yeah, may get a bit of a sort of a stern talking to. That's, you know, if you're ruining expensive makeup, but it's kind of cute. It's like,
Hmm.
oh, is that sweet? But I was very conscious about the fact, as a little boy at the time, had I been discovered, it would have been not only wrong to be doing what I was doing, but wrong from a it wasn't a boy thing.
Especially in the 70s. You know, it's
Yeah,
like,
especially in the 70s. Yeah.
and then so like how as you kind of went through, did you go to university? I'm trying to go through almost the careering as well because you ended up
No,
into
I
IT.
left. I left school at the age of 16 and a half, thereabouts in 1981, just about when Charles and Diana got married, actually.
Yeah.
So, yeah, they got married in the July, and I left school around about a week before that. And no, I joined the RAF. I was an
Wow.
avionics apprentice. I was a communications engineer apprentice studying avionics, radar, and radio communications. So that was my early career in electronics, all born out of a hobby that I thought I had. All stemmed from a Ladybird book on how to build a transistor radio, which my parents bought me. So that became my career of choice from a Ladybird book. I look back on it, and I don't think it was really my career choice, but it was kind of one of those, didn't know what I wanted to do at that time. All my friends at the time signed up for college, went to
Hmm.
university.
Hmm.
But neither of my parents had been to university, so it was not a natural push. I was not naturally pushed into an academic sort of future. So my father was an artificer in the Navy. He was a gunnery artificer, so he went through an apprenticeship program in the Navy.
Hmm.
So I think it was kind of, my influence was around going into an apprenticeship, either in commerce, defence industry, or one of the armed forces. Didn't fancy the Navy at the time. Lots of talk about going on submarines. I didn't fancy that, and so yeah, I got accepted into the RAF. Realised after about 3 or 4, well, 2.5, 3 years, that I really didn't understand electronics. It wasn't my forte. I wasn't really cut out for the kind of service life either. It just didn't resonate. So I left. I left after 3 years. So I did my training, left. Throughout that time, though, it was kind of instilled in us. You get obviously the military discipline. You're told about drugs are bad, being gay is bad. This is early 80s. So we're all very conscious about the fact that it was illegal to be gay, illegal to be not straight, for whatever that meant in those days. I guess you could call being trans, or gender confused, as being not straight, whatever that meant in those days. So yeah, very conscious about the fact that you had to perform in a very vanilla, very traditional way. And so yeah, I repressed a lot of my gender identity. I remember going on exercise, and the advice was to wear tights under your combats as another layer of warmth. But I had a different association with tights. So I was probably the only person out on exercise not wearing tights, because for me it just felt wrong. It was like, that was something that meant something to me, and all my colleagues at the time were laughing and joking about them, but to me it meant it had a far more deeper meaning. And seeing people taking the mickey out of something that I found resonated with me was quite strange. So yeah, I've got memories like that reinforce the fact that there was definitely a conflict in my head about how I felt about things.
And then when you said that you transitioned circa 5 years ago, when you set up your own business, left your former career, but like, how was that kind of, at what point was there a single point where you thought, actually, I want to transition? I'm just trying to, because what I'm trying to do is almost, if someone who might watch this might be gender confused, or, whatever that they choose to term it, it's that balance of just, I'm sure if they could hear someone else's experience, it will help them almost go through it themselves.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I left the RAF at the age of 19, back on Civvy Street. I met my wife-to-be in mid-80s. We got married in 87. At that time, it wasn't wrong for me. I wasn't fighting anything. I wasn't having a battle with myself. So that my gender confusion was just something inside. Again, there's still no language, still no internet, still no commonality. Section 28, I think it was 1988, was it Thatcher, something like that. So yeah, I was able to have I still have a successful marriage. Developed a successful marriage. Have two adult children now, 130, 127. So yeah, I formed a very stable traditional family. Again, I wasn't overly queer or trans or gay or anything like that. I was just a typical. People would describe me as a blokey bloke. I was drank too much, partied too much, hang around with friends too much. Started my own IT company when I was in my early 30s, having worked for a couple of banks. Built that company up over several iterations, over 15 to 20 years. But it was probably when I got to my mid to late 40s where, I don't know what it is. I think it's the kids get older. You've plateaued maybe in some of your life. You're not on the acquisition trail. You've kind of got what you want. You've got stuff. And maybe you take your foot off the pedal slightly. And then once you start maybe coasting in life at that age, you start to look around, start to realise what life's all around. And I think it just came to the forefront of my mind in my mid to late 40s. I shared this inner secret that I had with my wife in probably 2012. So how long was that? That's 10 years ago, give or take.
Wow.
10 years ago this year.
I can't believe that's 10 years ago.
I know, it sounds scary, doesn't it? 2012, 10 years ago.
I remember going to the Olympics. I still can't believe it's 10 years ago. You just said it, I just twigged. But anyway, sorry to interrupt.
Well, the Olympics, we often joke, my wife and I often joke about the Olympics. It's kind of I think from the beginning of the Olympics to the end of the Paralympics is when we were having these big challenging discussions as a married couple, and out of those discussions allowed me to share my transiness, for want of a better word. I didn't have a name for it. It wasn't real. It was kind of a hobby. It was something I did in private. I didn't go out. I didn't meet anybody. I didn't have a life as such. It wasn't real in those terms. It's something completely sort of private, something that was my own. But I think what happened was once I sat down and talked to my wife about it, we kind of didn't. It wasn't a threat at the time to our marriage because it was just something I was doing in the background. It was my wife was able to see it as something that was just part of me, but not a threat. But I think having talked about it openly, it gave it a life.
Mm-hmm.
It gave it oxygen.
Made it real.
It started to yeah. It was instead of being in a dark secret inside my head, it was now something I could talk about and share with somebody else. I tried many times to put it back in the box. I went feral. I grew a pretty major beard.
This is even after 2012.
2014.
Okay, so
It's
yeah.
in 2014.
Yeah.
So I grew a pretty kind of Bluto, Popeye and Bluto, a real big thick brown beard, quite bear-like. People look like a bear at times. So yeah, but then I think it's mid 2014, around April May. Having looked in the mirror, I thought I'd fixed it, cured myself. I think what it was I think I put it behind me 6 months. I put it behind me, and I was just starting to pack up the drawers for the clothes and everything else I had going on. And rather than put it in a bin liner and throw it away, the act of getting it out and it just suddenly everything came rushing back to me. It was that point there I realised that all I was doing really was just brushing under the carpet, ignoring it. So I shaved my beard off almost that afternoon, and I joined a trans support group run by the Beaumont Society, who are a national charity who've been going for many years. I found their local club, for want of a better way of putting it, support group, and started going to their monthly meetings. And there was two different ones, so I was going twice a month to these groups, and that was mid 2014. I started building a network of friends on Facebook, on social media, on other networks. Gave myself a name, and then again, once you've got a name, once you can describe yourself, people start using your name. People start describing you, and you build friendships, you build relationships. That person, that embryo you created, suddenly has a life. It is no longer something that's in your head, your fantasy, or something you want to unlock. It becomes real. So I think that's what kind of developed in the mid 20s, whatever it is, 2010s.
Yeah.
And in 2016, it got to the point where it was just too big to keep a lid on it. I got to the point where I couldn't keep living this double life. I was developing two personalities, two lives, it's like these two separate entities. I do two groups of friends. I couldn't talk about that. In the trans world, you're very kind of secretive about our other life because you didn't want it to leak out who you were. You didn't want it to cross over. You want to keep these two lives completely separate. And I just found that I was becoming these two people, and I wanted to be one person. I wanted to be one person again. And the more I realised that the one person I wanted to be was my female self. That was the one that became the dominant person in my head. And there's I think it's a Pixar cartoon called Inside Out.
Yeah,
I think it is, where there's these characters in someone's head, and they put these balls down the shoe. And I felt like the angry red blokey character was driving my head, with all the female characters not getting a look in. And I don't know if you remember that film, but they end up sellotaping or tying the male blokey angry guy to the chair, and then all the women start driving the head. That's exactly how I felt. I suddenly felt, wow, I've got rid of that angry blokey character, that person who has been driving my head all this time, shutting the rest of me out. And now I'm in charge of my own head. The people, how I want to be, who I am, is now running my life. And that's how it kind of felt. I think taking hormones reinforced that. The lack of testosterone in my bloodstream affected me, made a huge difference. The estrogen made a huge difference just in the way my outlook on life, my emotional state, etc. So yeah, by mid 2016, I couldn't keep a lid on this. I came out publicly on Facebook. I wouldn't say that I was proud of the way I did it. It was a bit of one of those sort of like drunken cries for help at 2 o'clock in
Yeah.
the morning type things. So I don't regret it. I regret the way I did it,
Hmm.
not what I did.
Hmm.
So I would rather have not been such a drama queen about it, and maybe structured it in a different way. But it had the impact of ripping the sticky plaster off. It was out. I owned it, and that was kind of mid 2016.
Because I imagine that was pretty difficult to do.
Well, I was pretty drunk when I made the post, so it
I don't
wasn't.
mean
It
just a
wasn't.
one-off post, but it's that balance of where to go through that journey, and especially close family and friends and that kind of thing. But the reason why I think it's important, going back to like the diversity business thing, is that would it be correct to say that you didn't quite feel 100%? You didn't feel yourself for a while, and hence why you said when you were fighting between the two different personalities. Because what I'm trying to say is that, but if we
Yeah,
can create a workplace or an environment or whichever, where actually people do and can be themselves, you can be a lot more happy, I guess.
yeah. Undoubtedly, yes. Creating a workplace where we can be ourselves, we can talk about the challenge we've got. Um, I would say the challenge of a gender transitioning or coming out or being open
Hmm.
for being trans is a different dimension on top of coming out as being, say, gay or lesbian
Okay.
or bi. Because when you come out as gay, it's your sexuality, it's who you want to sleep with, who you want to have relations with, who you want to be romantically engaged with, who you want to spend your life with. That is completely different to suddenly changing your whole persona about how people perceive you. The hopes, dreams, aspirations, the family, how they see you is completely different. I'm not saying coming out as gay is easy either, but what I'm saying is the extra dimension of your gender
Hmm.
transition is a whole extra, yeah, as I say, extra dimension on the whole thing. Um, I think what I found was at the time, no matter how I didn't appreciate what the impact my transition would have on those around me, those closest to me. The challenge was, I think, I at the time fell into the trap of the YOLO trap, where it's your life. You only one your life live it. You only live once.
Hmm.
If people don't accept you, give them two fingers and get on with your life. Find the people that will accept you. I think there's a lot of that advice, if you form of a better way of putting it, you get given. Not just being trans, but a lot of things. But people, it's easy to say, yeah, just do it. I did it, but you don't know how many people actually did it. How many people are just fantasists? How many people have got lived experience? Do they understand your circumstances? So that the challenge is if you want to retain your life, your family, your friends, what you have, then you have to recognise that this has to be a partnership, it has to be a collaboration with the people who are involved in that. I think I've started off by believing that my transition was about me, very
Okay.
selfish. It was my transition. Everybody just needed to get the hang of it and accept me. Then we can all move on. I think we can also use that analogy in the workplace. You transition at work, just accept me so we can get on with it. But I think that what I've learned after 5 or 6 years, the journey I've been on, is that it's around working with people. I can't demand acceptance. I can't demand respect. I can't demand these things of people. What I can do is I can be a good person. I can be the best version of me I can be. And I can be somebody that is respectable. People will respect. I can be somebody that people do want to love. People do value. So I had to be the person that I wanted people to see,
Hmm.
and not make those demands up front. And that's the challenge I found in my early days, that I just wanted people to accept me,
Hmm.
but I forgot that they didn't know me.
But the thing is, to be fair, there's no instruction manual, or maybe there is, but as far as I'm aware, to kind of do this. And it's that balance of where, everyone in hindsight can think about how they would have done things differently 5 years ago, 10 years ago, whichever. But it's, you do the best you can at the time based on what you know, and you're obviously going through a very difficult time.
Completely. And I think what I learnt was I had to course correct as I went. I didn't just set off on this big,
Hmm.
bold plan. I realised very quickly that that plan wouldn't work. Me marching off into the distance was a very lonely type journey. In order to achieve that, I had to, let's say, do it collaboratively, which in some ways is slower. In some ways, you could argue it's more painful. But the end result is that you've brought people with you on that journey, and
Yeah.
the long term benefit is you've maintained those relationships. And something that was in my head for a lot of my life is a brand new bit of information for people. They have to get to know who you are. As I say, you can't suddenly say I'm now this new person, like me. Even with my friends, even with my work colleagues, you can't just make that demand. You have to allow yourself to go through go through a second puberty. You have to discover your own identity, your own dress sense, your own personality, your own likes. With all of that, let's say puberty type thing, dancing, clubbing, drinking, meeting people, socializing. And it's all about trying to develop your personality and know who you are in the world, and you need to do that. And I think I my only aim was to stop being 22 again and start acting my age. So I was keen to go for not get stuck in the 22 bubble and being an everlasting teenager. I wanted to go back to being time mid-50s. I wanted to be a mid-50s woman and be happy with being a mid-50s woman. And that's what I realised, that I needed to come out of that teenage bubble and just get on with my life again. And that was the challenge. And I think when you mentioned about the workplace, I don't think we talk about this challenge enough. We want to transition people. We want to put them on a conveyor belt, check them out at the other end. But like anything in life, there's the heavy lift in the middle. There's the bit that gets you from A to B. Is that I don't like the word journey or all these kind of words that we use. They're quite they don't really express what's going on. But there is a whole lot of lived experience in there that you have to get to know yourself. You have to like yourself. You have to be proud of yourself. You have to be comfortable with your own skin. You have to be comfortable in your own gender identity. You have to, we spend all of our lives dealing with gender programming. With the blue, the pink, boys' toys, girls' toys, expectation for boys, expectation for girls. It's incredibly difficult to unlearn and relearn that programming.
Do you feel
that's probably the hardest thing I found?
Do you feel like things have maybe changed? So if you had a 10-year-old now versus a 10-year-old in the 70s, the way things are treated now, I guess the fact that you have the internet, people can find out about things quicker, find a community, find people to talk to. Do you think it's easier now than it would have been for people 20, 30 years ago?
I think the answer is different.
Okay.
It's different. Is it easier being a kid today than it was in the 60s? It's different. It's different. I used to go and play in the park, run around the streets, come back when it got dark. No phones, no way of communicating. It was a safer world, less cars, etc., etc. Now there's a lot more social media. There's a lot more pressure to conform. Your identity is more open. So if you're in a positive and supportive environment, maybe yes, it is better. But if you're in an environment where you're less secure, you don't have the support network around you.
Okay.
The hurt and the hate can be amplified on social media. So I think there's new challenges, and I don't want to get into any it's better or worse. The challenges are significantly different. Yes, we can talk about sexuality now. Yes, we can talk about gender identity, but we look in the papers, the mainstream media, the news, Twitter, etc., social media. There's a lot of battles going on around trans support, trans awareness. We've got massive queues and waiting. People say, "Well, yeah, you can be trans now. Yeah, we accept you." But it's a 4 or 5 year waiting list at the gender identity clinics. Most GPs aren't ready to talk to you. So have we moved on? Yeah, we moved on. What we've done is we create an expectation that society is willing to accept, and then slam the door. We don't provide the support. We don't provide the backing. We get demonised in the press, we get demonized in social media. So in a way, yes, having more recognition and awareness has been fantastic, but it's been met with a backlash and lack of resources to support. So is it better?
Okay.
It sure as heck is different.
It's a good point. I like to get people's opinion and ask them and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So circa 5-6 years ago, you started See Change Happen as your own kind of consultancy business. Would you like to tell people?
It's a consulting vehicle. Yeah, it's a.
So what do you do?
I sold my IT company. I was tired of IT. I got really frustrated, but I've been in for so long. It was IT support, small businesses, and after 20 odd years of crawling around in desks, dealing with people's backups, people's anger and frustration when things didn't work, I was just tired of it. It was just becoming something that I just can't do this anymore. So at the same time, my gender transition became important. So at the end of 2016, my business partners offered to buy me out, which was great. So I sold my business beginning of 2017. I signed a non-compete clause that I wouldn't do IT again, which I was quite happy with. I didn't want to. I was tired of the IT game, and I had this ambition, if you like, at the time to create or help advocate in a world where trans people could get acceptance. Okay. I mean, I was transitioning. I had a lot of internalized transphobia. I had a lot of internalized issues. The trans people I knew had a very similar outlook on life, where there was frustration, there was lack of support, lack of acceptance. And this was 6 years ago. And if you look back 6 years, we've come a long way in 6 years in terms of knowledge and what we're talking about. But that time there, I was still unusual, very unusual. I'm not saying I'm saying I'm commonplace today. So I had the ambition to be kind of a trans awareness person, if you like. Training, public speaking, etc., etc. So that was my kind of early days ambition. And I think what happened was over the course of the first year, I realised that it wasn't just about me. In fact, I felt quite inauthentic and quite disingenuous thinking it was about me. I became sort of thinking, oh, it was all about being trans. People need to know about being trans. And I suddenly realised when I built a network of people who in the disability space, in the anti-racism space, and other D&I type topics, that the challenge was bigger than just talking about characteristics. Inclusion isn't about dividing people into characteristics and finding solutions for each characteristics. It's creating equitable opportunity for all. So I think that's what dawned on me as I went through 2017 into 2018. So I pivoted. I evolved it into being not just around trans awareness, but also including inclusion awareness. I describe myself as inclusion and belonging specialist. How do we create spaces where people can belong?
But like on that topic, like from a business strategy point of view, in the same way, if you have a bakery, you might evolve to a sell coffee. You would say to any business, it makes sense to actually be as inclusive, but actually evolve and change. And I guess you've done exactly that. That likewise, also because of your backstory and knowledge and experience, that's what gives you all the credibility and empathy to talk about different things in a way that I think it's brilliant to kind of hear, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, it is. I mean, I know many people who are disability advocates, and that's what they do. They're disability advocates, and they don't want to dilute that by talking about anything else other than disability. There are people who are race advocates who only want to talk about race or gender in the workplace. That's all they want to talk about. So there are a lot of people out there who quite rightly focus on their laser point, narrow focus, a niche. I think what happened was I didn't want to be a trans person talking about being trans. I felt that I had more to offer than just talking about myself. So that's why I moved away from just being solely focused on trans awareness. It wasn't making me satisfied as a person. I felt I had more to give in a different direction. So I still promote trans awareness. I do a lot of training courses. It's a big part of my business. But in the same way that I didn't want to do IT anymore, I recognised that also my transition, the pain of my transition, the passion I had when I transitioned, changed over time. So my life, I built a new life. I successfully maintained my marriage and my parenthood of my children and my relationship with my family. So I successfully navigated all those elements. So I lost a lot of the pain. I lost a lot of the activism, if you like. My business became established. I wasn't some of the pain I had trying to apply for roles, permanent roles as a trans person through recruitment agents, etc., being brushed back, feeling that I was being discriminated against, albeit subtly, not overtly. So a lot of that pain faded. And I also realised there was more people transitioning on a daily, weekly, monthly basis. There were more people who wanted to come and tell their story. So I didn't feel I needed to keep in that zone to keep telling my story. There were other people who were coming along telling their story. So it was a kind of an evolution through personal satisfaction, through personal gratification, not wanting to be seen as a trans person, just being trans. I felt that I had a bigger role to play that I wanted to play than just limiting myself to just talking about that. So that's kind of how it evolved, really. And I wanted to be a person who was talking about inclusion and belonging, talent acquisition, creating environments where people can thrive across the board. And I think I said at the time, if I can create an environment, create a world where everybody feels included, then I am everybody. I'm included, but as part of that. And we often talk about inclusion when we talk about creating accessible workplaces, lifts, ramps, stairwells, escalators to allow people who have a physical disability to access premises. It also allows people who have hip replacements, who break their leg skiing or just feel exhausted one day. They think, I don't want to walk up the stairs. So creating environments where everybody can succeed and thrive means that I'm everybody. It means I can succeed and thrive as well. So that's how I kind of saw it, and I still see it that way. I get a lot more satisfaction about talking about the bigger picture than just talking about me.
But I think it also adds a lot more credibility.
Talking about me.
But that was one of the things that struck me about the People Power talk, was almost that it was the broad breadth of knowledge that I could see could be used in a lot of different places for different businesses. That it's just it resonated with me. I thought it was really good. You obviously you not just do this. You occasionally, do you still do the stand up comedy? I know COVID might have put a pause on that a little bit. How did you get into that?
I'm a member of the Professional Speaking Association, and each year we have an annual conference to get together and meet. And on the Friday night, there is a speaking competition. There's a comedy competition, and I went to my first one, I think in 2018. I thought, oh, that comedy looks fun. In a kind of challenging way. And I'd happened to say to someone at the end of the evening, I said, how do I get my name down to be in the comedy next year? He said, well, you're talking to the right person. Your name's in. I went, oh, okay. So that was kind of my brave moment. But I'd in my previous life, I was the national president for a club, and I used to travel around the UK and Europe and the world. In the UK, I was going to sort of club meetings. Mainly black tie type events, and I was always put on as the pre-speaker warm up, if you like. So I would do the State of the Nations talk sort of thing, and inevitably there's a desire for the national president to be a little bit entertaining. So I got quite used to doing a kind of an after dinner 10-minute comedy light-hearted talk. So I wasn't new to the sort of stand up or the sing for your supper type talking. But yeah, no, I volunteered at this comedy night. I titled the sketch "Stupid Questions Not to Ask a Trans Person." I think brackets, aka how not to be a dick. And I delivered that. It went down well. I got good feedback on it. I then had an opportunity to deliver it again a couple of weeks later at an event in London. And then I had another opportunity when I was in Melbourne, Australia, with a friend of mine to do an open mic night comedy club in Melbourne, in the Highlander Bar in downtown Melbourne. So I did it there. So I did it 3 times. I think but So it's never really
Because I think it's one of
it
those
takes me out
things.
my comfort zone.
Like when we
Yeah.
started talking about comedy, but almost I think comedy is a great way to diffuse tension and almost to win people over. And I just think, likewise, I still believe that being able to do comedy on stage, it's like the ultimate stress test for public speaking. I remember I reached out to, there's a guy in the
Oh,
Northeast
completely.
called Alfie Joey, and actually said to him, look, is there anywhere where you can go where they teach you to do stand-up comedy? Not that I'm not funny, but it was almost where, but to put yourself through that would help, that when you do speak on stage about work stuff, I think you would be better if you've actually got a background and you feel comfortable. And that was why, as someone that does, public speaking, you do very, very well. Likewise, I just wanted to pick your brains about the journey and how you got into it and that kind of thing.
There is this event that I did the comedy act at after the professional speaking conference. He actually puts on a day of comedy training. So he has a professional comedian who
Mm-hmm.
coaches people who want to do the comedy slot the next night. I've never done it. I'm one of these people. I don't take advice, so I'd rather fail on my own merit and succeed on my own merit than to be coached, if you like. So I've never done it myself, but several people have done it and they've been very successful at it. And this same event has run 3 or 4 times since, and there has been a comedy sort of training coaching session the day before. So yeah, there are places that will take you through how to build a 5-minute set. Talked about the pitfalls, about timing, around how to structure, how to get the story right, the pace, all these
Mm-hmm.
kind of things. How to wait for the laugh, how to signpost and drop it at the end. All that kind of
Because
stuff.
so much of the thing that is, I know obviously you mentioned the PSA before, but that balance of, if you give a talk, same as you did at People Power, I think the ability to hold a room and talk to people is a real skill that I just think there's really good crossovers there. Anyway, I am conscious of
Completely,
time.
I agree. I agree. I
Um,
agree. I was
you
going
go.
to say, comedy I still see as something that pushes me out my comfort zone.
Mhm, mhm.
I'm not saying stage speaking I'm in a comfort zone,
But it's different.
but comedy takes me pushes me a little bit further out. And the last time I delivered it was probably back in August, and it was the first time I delivered that comedy routine where I really enjoyed delivering it. I felt like I owned the stage. It's taken me 5 or 6 times of delivering virtually the same set
Mhm.
to get to a point and come out and go, wow, I enjoyed that.
But things, a lot of the professional comedians and Jimmy Carr and that kind of thing, they practice the same routine hundreds of times before they actually get in the arena, because they change the different things. And it's anyway, I just think it's a really interesting kind of crossover. So I tend to end every interview with 3 main questions. Again, these all get clipped up to go onto YouTube, and I actually find these really interesting, just in a way to learn from other people's kind of experience and what they've been through and that kind of thing. The first one is, would you be happy to share the best piece of advice you've ever had?
Best piece of advice I've ever had. Someone told me when I started my new business, it's going to take me 2 years to get somewhere. I'm not saying it's the best bit of advice I've ever had, but it's the bit of advice I remember. And they were right. And I think it's like anything, you have to become. There's a lot of investment in time and effort to get things going. And it does take you 2 years. It takes you 2 years. It probably took 2.5, 3 years before I got to the point where I was happy. But yeah, I think that's a good bit of advice is, if you are starting a business, you are doing something, then there's no quick fix. There's no free lunch. There's no easy dinner here. It is it's proportionate to the amount of graft you put in.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, even if you get lucky or have a lot of money behind you, you've still got a lot of learning to do. And there's a lot of learning went on in those first 2 years.
But people always say that the harder you work, the luckier you get, which I think
Exactly.
is true as well. The next question, and I think hopefully it's quite relevant to you, but almost, if you were to give advice to your younger self, and you could pick the 10-year-old at school, the chap in the RAF, yourself 10 years ago, 5 years ago, if you were to give advice to your younger self, what would it be?
I suppose the answer to that would be, it'll be okay. Just do what you're going to do. believe in yourself, trust yourself. Won't be easy, but you'll get there. I think that's the advice I would give. Just be you.
I think it's really good advice just for people generally. Like, even I went for a walk from my house into Newcastle before, and again, start of a new year, you think, oh, okay, what goals and things do I want to achieve and whichever. But the truth is, people often put too much pressure on themselves, or they try and be what someone else wants them to be, or whichever. And I think sometimes, yeah, you're right. It's just, be happy with what you've got, take your time. And I just think that's a really kind of good piece of advice. Is there anything you would like to talk about or plug before we go?
No, I took part in a Channel 4 documentary. So if you are interested in finding out more about me or myself, my wife, during my gender transition, so that it followed us for 3 years. We had a TV film crew.
Wow.
You can find that on Channel 4, all 4 catch up. The TV series called The Making of Me. I'll send you a link to that. And we also appeared on Gogglebox. So we so our segment of that documentary was featured on Gogglebox. So I've have the pleasure of being talked about by the Goggleboxers. And,
how did the Gogglebox thing go? It's funny that when I go back to my mum's, and like now I'm a very different person to who she was and whichever, but actually when I go back for, say, for Christmas, the one thing that we always kind of link over, but when I put Gogglebox on, it's kind of, hopefully they didn't slate you, but it's one of those things that people always say what you think, and I always actually really enjoy it.
Yeah, I found it.
I imagine it's different when it's you actually on screen. Okay.
I sorry, excuse me. I do cringe. I mean, at one point one of the Goggleboxers said, "Oh, she looks like a dinner lady," and then a friend said, "That wasn't the look she was going for, Liv." And so I always find that, and I found that quite. That hit home, and also someone said, "Oh, you look like Nana Muscuri." I thought, "Oh, that wasn't the look I was going for either." So it kind of, there's a couple of comments like that those are the ones that make me cringe. But what makes me happy and warm is the genuine warmth they had.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
They didn't understand, they didn't get it, they talked about it, and you could hear their thought processes between them going, "Oh, I don't get that, I don't get that, I don't get that." And it was really interesting to hear people talking about me and being honest about
when
what
it's
they
not
thought
to your
about
face.
me.
Yeah.
But not to my face. But it taught me to understand what people are thinking.
Mm-hmm.
One of the biases we have is we believe we know what people are thinking.
Yeah.
We don't. We've got no idea what people think. And actually, to be a fly on the wall or the fly on the wall is really quite powerful. So that taught me a lot about myself. It taught me a lot about people, and it gave me a lot of hope because the questions they were asking were valid. They were genuine. They were I understood their confusion, and I thought it was really powerful. So it was a great experience to have been on Gogglebox, if you like.
Cool. Well, it's been a pleasure to kind of speak to you. I appreciate it's a bank holiday, and also for me, it's a great way to start the year to actually just speak to different people, and hopefully over the year I'll hopefully kind of keep doing this. Hopefully we've raised some people's awareness or just ideas on maybe some of them, might not have met a trans person before, and it's that kind of balance. Or likewise, you might have someone that's slightly younger on YouTube or maybe slightly older who wants to feel and experience someone else's background and their journey. And I think hopefully, I love to kind of learn more about people as well and that kind of thing as well. So I appreciate it.
Yeah, if anyone wants to get hold of me, they can catch up with me on LinkedIn. I'm sure you'll put it in the notes. But yes, Joe Lockwood, J-O Lockwood on LinkedIn. Find me, track me down. You can drop me a message. Happy to have a chat. I've done a lot of ad hoc informal chats with people who have either transitioning themselves, they've got a child or a parent or somebody in their family transitioning. I've had a lot of people reach out to me on LinkedIn, having watched Gogglebox or having watched the documentary. So, no, more than happy. So if you'd like to find out more, or you'd like to have a chat with me about how I can create awareness in your organisation, love to do that as well.
Perfect. And that is the perfect ending to the interview. So thank you for your time. Have a wonderful, rest of your bank holiday, which I know it's after 5 o'clock now. But no, genuinely appreciate your time, and hopefully I'll speak to you soon. Cheers, Joanne. Bye-bye.
Absolutely. Fantastic. Thank you. Bye.